Getting up. The memories of this time period are spotty. I was in a state of shock for the most part, and I didn't have anyone in my life for emotional support. Not my family, definitely not his family or his friends. They all blamed me, actually. The co-worker I was close with, who gave us Ayana's bassinet and who I turned to for comfort, said to me, "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but Eugene is going to hell. That's where souls who commit suicide go." She was Catholic, and that's what they believed. Thanks for that. Helpful, really. My Jehovah's Witness neighbors downstairs who came up and saved me took away my hope that at least Eugene was an angel now watching over us. They sat me down in their apartment shortly after this tragedy and told me Eugene was asleep, like in a coma, and would not wake up until the second coming of Christ. When is that going to happen? I asked. No answer. Didn't look promising. I know people were trying to be helpful, but all they did was scare me and made me believe less in religion than I already did. Neither belief felt right or true to me. The couple of friends I did have from college lived in other states. One day, a few of them came to Long Island for an intervention, since I had been lying in bed depressed. What else was I supposed to do? I got really annoyed at one of my girlfriends who thought I needed to get over it and go out again. Really? That's compassionate. I continued to lie in bed, falling into a deeper pit of despair and darkness, thinking if I just laid here and never moved, eventually I would wither away and die. I don't remember how I took care of Ayana, if I even did, or for how long I was in bed. I vividly remember my 2-year-old daughter walking over to me, putting her hands on my shoulder, smiling and saying in her sweet, innocent voice, "It's okay, Mommy." It was like she knew something. Those words resonated in my heart. My 2-year-old daughter was comforting me. This wisdom from a heavenly 2-year-old sure beat the wisdom my adult friends were giving me. At that point, I said to myself, "You have a choice. You can lay here, wither away and die, or you can get up and take care of that little girl." So I got up, and every day after that, it wasn't easy. Sometimes in life, just getting up and showing up is about all you can do. And sometimes that is all you need. I tried to only cry when my daughter was napping or sleeping, but the pain overwhelmed me that it had nowhere else to go but out in heartbreaking sobs. I grieved at the thought of my daughter without a father and raising a child alone. At the same time, I was grateful that we were both alive. I decided to focus on a second chance at living. Focusing on the silver lining seemed like my only salvation. That juncture in my life of rising up after being brought to my knees was one I was going to experience 2 more times, something I could not imagine back then. The one person who was my inspiration to keep getting up was my daughter. So I got up and went to work. No therapy, no counseling, no group support, just work, and take care of my baby. I was in survival mode, working at an investment firm making $22,000 a year as an administrative assistant. Living on Long Island with a small child was expensive, and I didn't want to depend on welfare for single mothers or food stamps, which I was on. So I studied on my own, earned my Series 7, and became a licensed financial consultant. My days were exhausting, as were my nights. I brought my daughter to daycare in the morning, went to work early, studied from 8 to 9 a.m., then worked from 9 to 5. On my lunch hour, I would exercise. Physical exercise kept me sane. I would go for a run, or sometimes I would even roller skate in the parking lot of my office. Looking back now, people must have thought I was nuts. I didn't care if I was sweaty the rest of the day. Being strong and in shape was more important, and it was my only me time. I'd then pick up my daughter, rush home, make dinner, play the mommy role, and study more. No matter what, every night I read to her as I put her to sleep, falling asleep next to her in her tiny bed before she did, though. The life of a single parent. I never had a break. I was so determined to do right by my daughter, On my only week of vacation, I went into the office every day, locked myself in a room, and studied from 9 to 5. It was a studycation and a sacrifice because this was the last career I wanted to have. I had to convince myself that learning about options and reading the prospectus of a mutual fund was exciting and interesting. On top of that, my beautiful daughter was a challenge to raise. She was diagnosed with ADHD and ODD. The school psychologist insisted Ritalin would be the answer. She persisted for years until one day I looked at her in the eye and said, "Dr. S., I appreciate all your efforts to help my daughter and what you think is the right thing for her, but just know that I will never put her on drugs." She never bothered me again after that. I preferred to deal with Ayana's unruly behavior than numb and medicate her. By the time she was a teenager, she outgrew the ADHD anyway. There was also concern that she would suffer from depression like her father, that it could be genetic. I refused antidepressants for Ayana as well. Besides, medicating her didn't make sense to me. Her brain was still developing. That's what I call mommy radar. Between my stressful career, my repressed emotions, the anger, pain, and guilt I was carrying that came out as yelling and screaming, I had to raise a defiant, hyper child whose automatic and immediate response to me was no. Our house was not too peaceful, to say the least. I did what I had to do for my child, however. She was the priority in my life now. I became successful and worked my way up in a man's world. Toxic shame. In addition to the guilt and grief, I discovered a new version of shame. I felt embarrassed being a single mother. I felt ashamed when I took my daughter for a walk in the neighborhood and saw nuclear families living in their home with a white picket fence. I felt shame just taking her to the park. I didn't know where these belittling feelings came from, but it felt awful. It didn't help that we lived in an all-white suburban neighborhood and my daughter was a mix of races. We definitely weren't cookie-cutter people. This stigma was not something I imagined. Racism existed even in my own family. My grandmother refused to let us use her cabana in Long Beach because she didn't want to be the first to have a black person at the beach, she informed me one hot summer day. She also had to get permission for us to go to family dinner at the country club because blacks were not allowed yet. This was in 1994 in New York. Ayana and I rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment for 8 years. That was all I could afford. My daughter had the bedroom. I slept in the living room, which posed as my bedroom and gym as well. There was a couch, TV, entertainment center, my bed, a dresser, and a recumbent stationary bike all crammed in one room. But I made it work. I continued to grind away, sacrificing my dreams and happiness as a financial consultant to take care of my daughter. Knuckle up. A silver lining that came from Eugene, besides my daughter, was a new best friend. One of his only friends who didn't blame me quickly became an angel in our lives. She and her boyfriend, who was Eugene's best friend, stepped up to the plate and watched over us for years. They were a light in our challenging lives. A couple of years had gone by and she didn't want to see me alone anymore, thought it was time I dated, so she set me up with a coworker from the gym. It turned out that the best thing I learned from this boyfriend was how to box. One night at a club in Brooklyn, after one too many drinks, he got possessive and angry and accused me of flirting with another man. Although that didn't happen, he didn't believe me and proceeded to hit me upside the back of my head as we sat in his Mustang convertible arguing. My boyfriend was a Golden Glove boxer, 220 pounds of pure muscle. The punch took me by surprise. As I was coiled over with my head on my lap, rage building, I came up in a fury and gave him a right hook to his nose. With blood gushing out of his nose, he looked down at the blood, looked at me, looked back at the blood in his hand, and then started to smile. He was in shock, yet impressed. Getting up again. So when I met my fiancé, I will refer to him as soulmate number 2, after this last boyfriend, I thought this new relationship would be my saving grace. My daughter, 8 at the time, took to this man, called him daddy right from the start, which made me happy. We upgraded to a 2-bedroom apartment. with our own back porch and yard. My picture-perfect nuclear family with the white picket fence was coming together. No more being alone, no more feeling like a loser. My happiness was riding on my daughter's happiness, but little did I know that hers was riding on mine. This was my second dark night of the soul, the second time I would be lying on the floor, contemplating whether the pain in my heart would be too much for me to live with, and thinking how much easier it would be if I just closed my eyes and never woke up. This was also the third time I was hit in the face by a man. I knew this had to stop. This was my wake-up call. Sitting in our living room the next day, I told my daughter that Daddy was not coming back. She screamed, "No," and ran into her room. To me, there was no greater agony to my heart than hearing my daughter cry over losing another daddy. Ayana constantly talked about her biological daddy and questioned how he died. It was disturbing because I had to lie to her every time. I made up a story that he got a virus and went to the hospital and then died. It worked for a few years until she started asking me what kind of virus. She was a very inquisitive kid and I didn't know what to say. Then I was paranoid that whenever she got a cold or virus, she would think she was going to die. I didn't know what to do. Daughter. As much as Ayana was sad over losing another daddy, she was more concerned about me, however. Noticing I was losing weight fast, she turned to me one day, sitting on the couch together, and said, "I won't be sad, Mommy, if you aren't sad." Another turning point in my life as I realized the powerful effect I had on her. It reminded me of the time when she was 2 years old. We were in the living room. I was having one of my adult temper tantrums, picked up my sneaker and threw it across the room. Ayana went over to her little sneaker, picked it up, looked at me, smiled, and threw hers across the room. She was imitating me. Her innocent expression, "Are you proud of me?" said it all. I learned later in my personal growth studies that children learn by watching and imitating others, downloading information into their spongy brains without a filter, almost like hypnotism, in the theta cycle of the brain until age 7 or so. I wish I knew this information when I was raising her. To this day, she always calls me out on things. It's kind of annoying, actually, because she's usually right. She'll say, "Mom, you're being a hypocrite." It was never about what I said to her. It was about what I did. Her insight was part of my inspiration to change my behavior, not just talk about it. She was and is an unbelievable young woman. She was always picking me up and making sure I wasn't sad. She would write me little love notes and leave them everywhere for me. When we went to the supermarket, she would disappear and return a few minutes later after I had a heart attack, of course, with a flower, a little teddy bear, and a love note to ease my broken heart. I carried a burden, though. How do you tell your child that their parent took their life? How would that not make them feel like they weren't worth hanging around for? That would surely ruin their self-esteem. I felt helpless that no matter what I said, it wouldn't matter. I didn't want her to feel abandoned like I did my entire life. However, I knew I would always be there for her and do everything in my power to be the best mom I could, especially after all I had been through since my entrance into this world. My daughter, Ayana, was my inspiration to heal.